And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Chuck Mangione, his biography and best hits. During this summer, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. First up, Main Squeeze, a smooth and controlled album featuring top New York session players. Chuck even uses a wah-wah pedal on his flugelhorn here, adding a funky, almost Miles Davis vibe on some tracks. The title track is a standout, a joyful, funky jam that really breaks loose. Then there's Bellavia, inspired by Mangione's family and packed with big band energy and bop influences. It's got a lush, sometimes edgy sound, showing a side of Chuck before he fully embraced his smoother crossover style. Finally, Eyes of the Wheel Temptress is a unique collaboration with Philly soul legend Thom Bell. It mixes Chuck's jazz pop with a soulful orchestration, even features some vocal tracks. It's not his most consistent album, but it's fresh, enjoyable listen that highlights his willingness to experiment. Welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Chuck Mangione, his biography and best hits. During this summer, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Let's start with Main Squeeze, released back in the late 70s, but a bit of a hidden gem for years, as it was briefly available on CD before becoming quite rare until its 2018 reissue. This album sees Mangione really embracing the studio as his playground. He gathered some of New York's finest session musicians to craft a smooth, intimate set of love theme instrumental tracks. It's warm and velvety. One quirky highlight, Chuck experiments with a wah-wah pedal on his flugelhorn here. Imagine that, a wah-wah flugelhorn? It's reminiscent of some of Miles Davis' electric experiments but filtered through Mangione's softer, more controlled style. The album's closer, the title track Main Squeeze, is an ecstatic, funky jam session that finally lets loose after several mellow numbers. It's a nice contrast to the rest of the record's polished restraint. Though critics at the time found it a little too laid back, many listeners appreciate the album's relaxed vibe and musicianship. If you're in the mood for some lush, late 70s jazz with romantic leanings, Main Squeeze is worth your time. Moving on to Bellavia, which is a fascinating snapshot of Mangione before he embraced the super smooth commercial sound he'd be later known for. This album, named after his family's maiden name, is like a portrait of the bustling Mangione family life, full of energy and lush orchestrations. There's a clear bop influence here mixed with some big band flair. Tracks like Listen to the Wind and Toriano have this vigorous spirit, showing off Joe LaBarbera on drums, Jerry Neewood on saxophone, and Chip Jackson on bass, supporting Chuck's growing orchestral ambitions. Mangione also showcases some variety here, playing the flugelhorn, Rhodes electric piano, even Celeste on the playful Dance of the Wind-Up Toy. While it might not have the instant hooks of his later mega hits, Bellavia remains one of his better A&M releases, a lush, textured, sometimes edgy jazz big band sound before he finally settled into smooth jazz territory. Now for something a little different, Eyes of the Wheel Temptress, Mangione's last major label release, and a collaboration with the Philly soul legend Thom Bell. It's a bit of mixed genre, but definitely worth a listen for fans curious about Chuck's later career experimentation, and the 7-track split between Mangione's usual Spanish-influenced jazz pop style and Bell's soulful Philly sound. The opener, That's Nice, is a catchy tune. The vocal tracks, Do You Ever Think About Me and Freedom Song, actually grow on you, especially the former, which is quite memorable. Chris Vadala's saxophone work shines throughout, perhaps his best recorded sound on a Mangione album. It's a smooth, easy listen, and if you're into the Philly soul jazz fusion vibe, this one's a fascinating record to explore. So there you have it, 3 albums that showcase Chuck Mangione's range beyond the big crossover hits. From the studio intimacy of Main Squeeze, the bop-tinged orchestra Bellavia, to the soul jazz fusion of Eyes of the Wheel Temptress, each one tells a part of his musical story. So that was some insight into some of Chuck Mangione's best albums of all time, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. After a 15-year detour in the world of dermatology, bassist and composer Wink Winkleman has emerged with a debut album. It's called Be It Known. Wink's breakout moment came with a critically acclaimed film called A Place to Fall Down, and now he's assembled a heavy-hitting ensemble of world-class musicians to deliver an album that feels part spiritual jazz, part meditative journey, and part experimental rock opera. Tracks like Cute and Clustered kick off with a laid-back R&B groove and morph into something that sounds like classical fusion meets psychedelic arena rock. Then you've got Q-Trip, a nod to A Tribe Called Quest, that slides effortlessly into a swinging jazz groove. So that was some trending album news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Chuck Mangione's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Chuck Mangione, his biography and best hits. During this summer, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. First up, the Greatest Hits album from 2010, a perfect summary featuring all his classic tunes like Feel So Good, Children of Sanchez and Land of Make Believe. It's a relaxing, well-produced collection that brings all his favorites together. Then there's Friends and Love, a live double album from 1970 with the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. It's an ambitious mix of jazz, pop and folk, showcasing Chuck's skill as a composer and conductor before his commercial breakthrough. Finally, the Chuck Mangione Quartet album takes us back to his jazz roots, with tight melodic performances featuring some of his best solo work alongside saxophonist Jerry Niewood. If you like smooth, straight-ahead jazz with a Latin twist, this one's for you. So whether you want hits, orchestral fusion or intimate jazz, these albums show the full range of Mangione's talent. So that was a quick recap of what's coming up during this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Chuck Mangione, his biography and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. Let's start things off with Greatest Hits released in 2010. This compilation is like a perfect getaway for anyone new to Mangione or a nostalgic stroll for longtime fans. It collects many of his signature tracks like the unforgettable Feel So Good, which really put him on the map in the late 70s. What's great about this album is how well it's mastered. Listeners say it's relaxing and wonderfully clear, letting you pick out each instrument with ease. Whether it's a catchy title track, the cinematic Children of Sanchez theme, or the upbeat Give It All You've Got, this collection spans the breadth and depth of Mangione's popular crossover hits in one neat package. Now, stepping back a little further, let's talk about Friends and Love. This album takes us to 1970, a time when Mangione was really pushing the boundaries with a full orchestra. Recorded live with the Rochester Philharmonic, this double long play was a bold risk and a huge success for him. Unlike his later smooth jazz focus, Friends and Love blends jazz, pop, rock, folk and lush orchestral arrangements into a unique multi-layered concert experience. Mangione didn't just play the flugelhorn here, he conducted the orchestra and created rich melodic compositions that still connect on an emotional level. One standout is Hill Where the Lord Hides, featuring the warm soprano sax of Jerry Niewood and Mangione's own heartfelt flugelhorn. The suite Friends and Love itself is a sprawling 26-minute journey with folk-based vocals, orchestral Dixieland and Latin jazz influences. It's ambitious, sometimes meandering, but full of youthful energy and a clear love for musical fusion. If you want to see Mangione's artistic roots before the big commercial hits, this album and the DVD release capturing the concert is a real treat. Finally, let's talk about the Chuck Mangione Quartet album from 1971, a gem that jazz purists often point to as some of his best straight-ahead work. While Mangione's larger orchestral projects could feel a bit polished and safe, his quartet sessions released his more authentic jazz chops. This group featured Jerry Niewood on soprano sax and flute, bassist Joel DiBartolo, and drummer Ron Davis. Together, they create a silky, easy-listening jazz sound that's melodic and tasteful from start to finish. Highlights include Mangione's original Land of Make-Believe, a Latin-tinged catchy number, and the beautiful Self-Portrait with Niewood's understated flute over Latin percussion. There's also a nod to jazz greats with Freddie Hubbard's Little Sunflower, where Mangione channels Miles Davis in his solo. Niewood shines with some Coltrane-inspired soprano sax on Floating, and their take on Louis Bonfar's Manhattan Carnival is a lush tropical mood piece with plenty of interplay and solo fireworks. This album isn't flashy or avant-garde, it's smooth, warm and sophisticated, perfect for listeners who appreciate jazz that's easy on the ears but still deeply musical. Greatest Hits for the timeless crowd pleasers, Friends and Love for the ambitious orchestral fusion, and the Chuck Mangione Quartet album for a pure melodic jazz experience. Each of these albums shows a different side of Mangione's talent, from the broad strokes of orchestral compositions to the intimate quartet interplay. If you want to understand why Mangione remains a beloved figure in jazz, these records are essential listening. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Chuck Mangione, his biography and best hits. We've come to an end of this week's episode of the Jazz Update, so now let's recap what we were discussing during this program. Chuck Mangione was a true jazz icon whose sound has touched generations. Today we explored his rich biography, starting from his roots as a gifted flugelhorn player and composer, through his rise in the 1970s as one of jazz's most beloved crossover artists. Mangione's music, of course, is impossible to talk about without mentioning his signature hit Feel So Good, that catchy, smooth tune that climbed the charts in 1977 and became an anthem for jazz pop fusion. It's the kind of song that you might have heard on the radio in a TV show like King of the Hill, or just drifting from someone's stereo on a sunny afternoon. And while some critics dismissed it as easy listening, the musicianship behind it, including solos by Mangione himself and guitarist Grant Giesman, truly highlight his talent. We also took a closer look at Children of Sanchez, the Grammy-winning soundtrack album that showed off Mangione's ability to tell stories through the music, weaving emotion, culture and cinematic flair into every note. That album's mix of instrumental and vocal tracks gave us a glimpse into Mangione's more ambitious and soulful side, far beyond the pop crossover hits. Also, a lesser-known but equally interesting album, Main Squeeze, which experimented with funky jams and even wah-wah pedals on the flugelhorn. Also Bellavia, where you can hear the roots of his earlier bop influences before his big commercial success. There was also Eyes of the Wheel Tempress, where Mangione collaborated with Philly soul legend Tom Bell, blending smooth jazz and soul with some interesting vocal jazz. Beyond the music, we remember Chuck Mangione not just a musician but also as a storyteller, a collaborator and a bridge between jazz, pop and the wider world of music. Although he passed away recently, his legacy lives on, in every note of Feel So Good, every sweeping score of Children of Sanchez, and in the hearts of jazz lovers everywhere. So that was a quick recap of everything that we discussed on this week's episode of the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashani Silva. And on that note, we've come to an end of this week's episode of the program. Don't forget, you can check out the archives of today's program on my YouTube channel, The Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan. So I'll see you again next week. Have a great week ahead.